Okay, so today our topic is the Crusades, one of the most important things that happened in the 12th century Renaissance. And we're going to take a look at it and see why it played such an important role in the 12th century Renaissance. In fact, you're going to find in the Crusades not only rebirth, but you're going to find innovation. That is to say, things happen for the first time. Rebirth means something that's already happened in the past, and it's going to be reborn. It's going to start over again. Now, you ever wonder if you can keep on doing something that you've been doing for a long time? You know, when you get older, things start to messing up a little bit. I mean, like for instance, my great-granddaughter came one time to see us, and I asked her. I said, "Have you ever played hopscotch?" And she said, "No, I never heard of that." She's about 9 or 10 years old. And so I went out to the driveway. I got a piece of chalk and a washer from the toolbox, and I drew a hopscotch design on the blacktop, and I said, "Okay, now watch me." And I was throwing this washer into number 1, and then I'm going to hop through. And I started to hop, and I couldn't hop. and I think it was at that moment that I knew that I was an old man. You can't hop, you get old. And of course, a few other things that start since then. I wonder sometimes about giving lectures to people. I mean, you know, is this something I can keep doing? Or should I say, that's enough, you're going to really mess it up badly the next time you try this. So far, I've been able to pull it off. I remember seeing in New Yorker magazine, there was a New Yorker, Pheidippides. You know, Pheidippides was a guy that ran from Marathon Field to Athens to announce to the people that the Athenians had defeated the Persians at Marathon. 21 hundredths of a mile or something like that. The modern marathon comes from this event. But in this particular, and of course, in the story, and it's told in the Greek historian Herodotus as the account of Pheidippides making the run and making the announcement, and of course, once he has delivered the message, he drops dead. I guess you've all heard of that story. But the New Yorker cartoon shows Pheidippides coming, and he reaches it out, he's doing his best, and he says, all these people were standing around, all the leaders of the Athenian government and the generals and everything, that is, those who were on the battlefield, and he says, I forgot the message. I just wonder sometimes we'll start talking to these people about something and I forget the message. Well, so far so good, but I never know when it might happen. Well, no, so much for that. I guess I'm inspired by Voltaire's. Voltaire said one time that we must battle nature and fortune every second, and never despair of anything until we are good and dead. And so, I mean, I try to think of that, and that helps keep me going. All right, so much of all this personality. Let's go ahead to the Crusades. The three great forces in play in the 12th century. In fact, they're there in the 11th century. In fact, that's the Crusades start right at the end of the 11th century. Crusades start in 1095, and so don't give you any dates that you have to remember. There are no tests in here, no final exams, and so you don't have, I'll give you dates, but you don't have to remember them except if it helps you during the lecture. Crusades actually cover about a 200-year period from 1095 to 1291. So all the crusades, the major crusades, will happen within those roughly 200 years, from 1095 to 1291. And I said there are three great forces in play here, and the three great forces are Roman Catholic Christianity, secondly, the Byzantine Empire and Byzantine Christianity, because Byzantine Christianity and Roman Christianity are constantly at war. In fact, in the middle of the 11th century, there is the split between the Eastern and the Western Church, that is, between the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Greek Orthodox Church in the East. And 1054, there's a long story about what happened in 1054, but this was one of the earliest indications that the two churches were systematic, that is, separated apart from each other. And the third force, so the first force is Roman Catholic Western Christianity, second force is the Byzantine Empire and Christianity, and the third force is Islam, the religion of Islam. Islam, of course, will come along later than either of the other two. It will have overrun Spain in the 8th century, but it starts in the 7th century. 632, Muhammad died. Of course, everybody knows who Muhammad is. And Muhammad, after his death, the Arabs, with their new religion, brand new religion of Islam, exploded out of the Arabian Peninsula and moved northward and westward across North Africa, across Gibraltar, into Spain, all the way up into southern France at the French city of Tours, Tours, and in the year 732, Charles Martel, the French ruler, will engage the Muslim force at Tours at 732 and turn them back. And so if Charles Martel had not succeeded in doing that, then this lecture would be in Arabic rather than in English. Okay, these are the forces that are going to be locked in life or death struggle in the end of the 11th century and the beginning of the 12th century and on through the 12th century. Well, how did it all begin? Well, it began down in the small French city in southern France, the city of Clermont, Clermont. And in that city, Pope Urban II had called a council. He was a very shrewd man, well-learned, a guy who had keen observations of events going on in the world, and he had a number of reasons for calling that meeting. And one of the reasons was he wanted a crusade to the Holy Land. I'll give you a definition. The word crusade comes from cross, the cross of Christ. And what the crusaders do deliberately take the cross. They will they'll tear up pieces of cloth and sew them on their shirts, and so they go into the Holy Land in the name of the cross of Christ. And but the Pope, there are a number of things going on in the end of the 11th century that Pope Urban II, and that's one Pope whose name I want you to remember, Urban II. Urban II is deliberately determined that he's going to gather a group of people that they will be willing to do it. And he appeals to just about every motive that a human being could imagine to go along. I mean, he will appeal to, he will say, you can get rich quickly, you can gain land, you can gain prestige, you can gain, the main thing you can gain if you happen to die in fighting the Muslims, you will go immediately to heaven. And of course, it's kind of interesting that Muhammad tells his people that if you die in the name of Allah, you'll go immediately to heaven. So it's kind of interesting that you'll get the Arabs and the Muslims and the Christians all together in heaven at the same time, that if things work that way. But in any event, it appeals to, it's a masterful speech. People who have studied the speech, I mean people, speech writers and orators who carefully studied the speech that is given when we have somebody wrote it down, obviously, or at least they wrote down what they think Irwin said, and oftentimes all the history we have is people writing down what they think they heard, and so in any event, gives us, and immediately the people are so moved by that they cry out, God wills it. God wills it, they cry out. Although they said it in Latin, I think, that is, those of them who spoke Latin, and most of them really didn't speak Latin because they were peasants who had gathered in the audience as well. I sometimes wonder exactly how you go about making a speech. I mean, I've got this magnifier, this microphone, and my voice is projected, but where does the Pope stand in 1095 and give the speech that everybody can hear and become so inspired that they will leave family and homes and head blindly toward something that they call the Holy Land of Jerusalem. In fact, most of the peasants who hear him saying that he wants people to go to the Holy Land and take land back from a new invader force, people called the Seljuk Turks, who had moved in that area from Asia and had come across and had conquered much of the Byzantine Empire on the way. And when they come to Jerusalem, the Seljuk Turks are much fiercer. They convert to the Islamic faith, and they're much more militant Muslims than the Arab Muslims who've been there for many years. In fact, the Christians and the Arab Muslims had worked out pretty cordial relations. I mean, business-wise, commerce, industry, there was a real tolerance. I mean, I don't know that it was intellectual or carefully worked out theoretically, but at least there was a toleration that existed between Arab Muslims and Christians who had come to the Holy Land. Many of them had come there as pilgrims over the centuries. Christians had been coming to see the holy relics for several centuries before the Crusades started. In fact, after 1000, we talked about this a little earlier, after the second coming didn't occur in 1000, as many of the people in Europe expected it to, and things settled down a bit, then the number of pilgrimages to the Holy Land increased every year. The number of pilgrimages and the number of people who joined those pilgrimages, more and more each century had come, and many of them by the time the Seljuk Turks in the 1070s and 1080s had begun to move into that area. Many of the pilgrims began to show up with arms, with weapons, whereas previous pilgrimages had not done any of that. And anyway, what happened, God wills it, and consequently, right away in 1095, a peasant horde moved across Eastern Europe headed for somewhere. They were going to Jerusalem, and they believed, in fact, most of the peasants believed that Jerusalem, that they were not just going to an earthly city of Jerusalem, that they were literally going to Jerusalem, the ultimate Jerusalem, that they were on their way to heaven, and that you could, if you walked far enough, you could get there. Now, I don't know whether any of you would be encouraged by notions like that, but that's what they had in their heads. If we get to Jerusalem, we will get to the ultimate place. That's certainly a motivating factor for people. I imagine there would be quite a few people in our day who would get on board if they thought that this is what they were going to find. Well, in any event, they went, but they didn't get too far. I mean, it was not a happy moment for Jews in Western Europe, because as the peasant horde started across Europe, and there was already this Jewish antipathy in Western Europe, and the Jews were already people who were very knowledgeable about commerce and industry and were successful in those areas, and a great deal of envy, class envy and other kinds of things going on, and some of the peasants, however ignorant and unlearned they may have been, they said to themselves, well, why should we go all the way to the Holy Land to kill infidels when we got them right on our doorstep? And they started massacring Jews all across Europe as they went. Probably about 5,000 people I'm talking about now, and only a handful of them got to Constantinople because the emperor had appealed to Pope Urban II. This is another reason why Urban called for the crusade, is that the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, his name was Alexius, Alexius, not the one that you call on to tell him to set the alarm. That's Alexa, isn't it? Alexis is his name. And Alexis had called upon Pope Urban II, would you help us out? If you don't stop the Turks, if we don't stop the Turks here, they're going to overrun us, and you're next. And so there was a real incentive for Urban II to try to help out over in the East. Well, so a straggling few, that is to say, I don't know how many, few thousand, if that many, made it to Constantinople. And Alexius was expecting armed knights. He was expecting seasoned veterans. He was expecting some of the great nobles of Europe, people like Raymond of Toulouse and Bohemond of Toronto and Baldwin, Count of Flanders. I mean, these are the well-known nobles of the day. The men with great contingents of knights in armor, chainmail armor. They hadn't quite developed one until the end of the 12th century that they were, the end of the 12th century, that plate armor was being worn by knights going into battle. So these were people wearing chainmail. They were experienced folk. And but he didn't get you don't have those right away. You just got the peasants. And when Alexius saw that contingent coming, he said, oh man, I had no idea this is what I was going to get. And so he ushered them through Constantinople, helped them get into boats to go across the straits on into what is now Eastern Turkey, or modern, ancient Asia Minor, and we never hear from them after that. And I would say none of them got to Jerusalem. None of them got to the Holy Land. And if, as the Pope said, they died going on crusade, they would have immediate entrance to heaven, then they may have gotten to Jerusalem that way, but they never got to earthly Jerusalem, to be sure. It wasn't until the next year, 1096, that the first real crusade got underway. And this one did have in it the great nobles, that is, the powerful nobles. And so they left, and they moved across, some went on boats, some went overland, They came to Constantinople. Alexis was glad to see such a more powerful group, and there were about 5,000 of those too. That is, the armed knights and the experienced knights, and many of them were not all that happy with the Byzantines. I mean, there was a sharp religious difference between the Greek Orthodox and the Roman Church, and they had locked horns, and just recently another item had come up. But this was astonishing that such what you and I would call a crazy little point, and that people divide completely over such a point, and the point was, and it had just come up in the 1080s, 1090s, the Western Church had added a couple of words to the Nicene Creed, and the Byzantine Christians didn't like it at all. In the Creed, they talk about the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the Spirit proceeding from the Son also. The Latin word for "from the Son" is filioque, and it's called the Western edition of the filioque clause to the Nicene Creed. And there was a huge battle over the West having said that the Holy Spirit proceeded not only from the Father, but from the Son as well. And so there was fresh fuel on the flames of religious controversy between East and West. And these knights were knowledgeable enough to know about some of those things and carried some of that animosity toward the Byzantine Christians. Well, in any event, Alexis was happy to see them, gave them additional furnishing, told them which way Jerusalem was, and they headed on out. They fought successful battles in Asia Minor. It was tough going, to be sure. You remember, I mean, they had to forage because you couldn't carry and you didn't have supply lines coming along and bringing food and everything that you need for the journey. And finally they get to Antioch, and Antioch is a tough call. It's a very important, well-defended city by the Turks. And they battled and there was no success. And finally there was a servant lad, one of the nobles, who came to him and said that St. Andrew, one of the apostles, had appeared to him in a vision and had told him that beneath the altar of one of the churches, the main church, the main cathedral in Antioch, there was was buried under that altar the holy lance, that is to say, the spear that the Roman soldier had thrown into the side of Jesus while he hung on the cross. That spear was buried under the altar. Now, you have to really shake your head on some of these things, and you ask yourself, well, how did that spear get from Jerusalem to Antioch, and how was it buried under the altar? Well, you don't ask those kind of questions when people have visions, right? When a person has a vision and says, this is what I saw, there are no printed words, there are no conversations that can deal with that. I mean, I saw it, and that ends it. And so this Bartholomew was the servant's name, and he says, and he told me exactly where to find it. And so not many people believed him. In fact, he endured a trial by fire in order to say whether or not he was telling the truth. And the artists delighted to depict Bartholomew being walking through fire and then coming out the other end and saying, I swear that it's up. And in any event, yes, and exactly so. He said about hearing all these people digging under the altar of that church. I'm sure the people in the church welcomed the small people digging up the altar, looking for the holy lance. And they come in and they dig, and not much success. And Bartholomew says, well, let me take a hand at it. He goes and he digs a few, and he comes up with a piece of decayed, not decayed, what is it, oxidized piece of iron. Guy, he says, the Holy Lance is here. Well, okay. If Bartholomew said so, and St. Andrew told him that's where it was, that's it. You know, here was a group completely stalled in battle and kind of ready, almost on the verge of giving up. And now, Holy Lance and on to Jerusalem. Isn't it amazing? History is something, isn't it? Well, okay. So they head on down and after, and we got eyewitness accounts. There's a historian named William of Tyre, Tyre, William of Tyre, one of the coastal cities on coast of Israel now. You know Tyre and Sidon, woe unto you, Tyre and Sidon, it's the same Tyre. William of Tyre has eyewitness accounts of what happened when the knights got to Jerusalem. They remember there in the book of Joshua, I'm going to run out of time if I keep talking. In the book of Joshua, you go around the city of Jericho 7 times. Well, the Crusaders went around Jerusalem 7 times in hope that the Turks in the city would give up. There were not only Turks, but there were Jews that run to the city to get away from the Crusaders. The Turks were in there. There were some Arabs with Islam still around, and there were even some Christians. There were Christian merchants who had been dealing with the Arabs now for decades before the Crusades, and really resented these Crusaders showing up and messing up their commercial associations, arrangements, and all of these people were holed up in Jerusalem. And here were the Crusaders marching around on the. By the way, the Crusaders, if you've got an image of them as a big, tall, husky people, you know, muscles rippling and all that, I can't illustrate that very well, but muscles rippling, you know. The average age of these, average height of these people was 5.3 inches. So they were pretty tiny men. And if you think of them riding on huge, great steeds, you're mistaken. They were puny little horses. It was really pathetic when you think about this contingent that arrived. William of Tyre says the walls didn't fall, so then they laid siege, and when they entered the area in the temple compound, that William of Tyre says the blood ran to the knees of the horses. That's probably an exaggeration, but it certainly is an illustration. The massacre was complete. Turks, Arabs, Jews, even, as I said, Christians were all massacred in the city. But it was a great victory for the Nobles Crusade, as it's called, as distinct from the Peasants' Crusade in 1995, in 1095. So the Crusaders then set up what came to be known as the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Kingdom of Jerusalem was set up along the coast of Israel. The northernmost area of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was Edessa, Edessa. There were 4 areas in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Edessa was way over between the Tigris and Euphrates River. On Edessa on the north, and then Antioch just below Edessa, then Tripoli below Antioch, and then Jerusalem. And so these 4 became the 4 parts of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and it lasted for 70 years. The Kingdom of Jerusalem flourished, became feudal, F-E-U-D-A-L, the same kind of feudal arrangements that existed in Western Europe. That type of government was implanted in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. They became very important. The Genoese and the Phoenicians and the Pisans from northern Italy delighted that the Kingdom of Jerusalem had been set up because they were able to work out commercial relations and set up ports on the coast and became international traders. So Kingdom of Jerusalem became extremely important development in the Crusades. Well, okay, years passed and you came to the year 1144. 1144, the Turks had regrouped and had solved some of their own internal problems and made a counterattack against the Kingdom of Jerusalem, attacking Edessa. That is the northernmost. That area of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was over between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and they conquered Edessa. And when the West heard about that, one of the great figures of the 12th century Renaissance, we've met him before. He was the persecutor of Peter Abelard, and his name is Bernard of Clairvaux, the abbot of Clairvaux. And one of the great moral figures of the 12th century Renaissance, wrote several of the hymns that you sing, O Sacred Head, now wounded, distributed to St. Bernard of Clairvaux, Jesus, the very thought of thee, St. Bernard of Clairvaux, wrote that, one of the great mystics. He was I don't know that he realized it, maybe he did, but he was probably as much danger to 12th century organized Roman Catholicism as you might imagine. Now, he never thought of himself as a heretic. He never, in fact, on the contrary, I mean, we've already seen with regard to Peter Abelard that he was a great attacker of Peter Abelard. Abelard had gone way off the track, and it was Bernard who got him condemned to silence in 1140. But the Abelard was a mystic. I mean, he was one of those guys like Bartholomew in a way, the Holy Lance guy, because for Bernard, the pathway to glory was divine love. I mean, what one did was to think and meditate, to contemplate yourself in relation to what's ultimate in the universe, and your aim is to try to see if you can't get the two to merge, to get your spirit and the divine spirit to come together as one. And you did that by prayer and meditation and contemplation. You didn't stop taking the sacraments, you didn't stop attending Mass, you didn't stop some of the organized structural kinds of things, but what was important is this personal divine connection. And it's, again, this fellow, in a way, if you can reach oneness with the divine through such a path, then you've got to think that the liturgies and the rituals take second place. And so here's the mystical St. Bernard. And when a guy like that speaks at society, people tend to listen to him. And besides that, he was an excellent speaker and a very convincing orator. In fact, he got the message that the Turks had overrun this part of Jerusalem, and Bernard himself single-handedly gathered together a crusade to go to the Holy Land. And this time, he was more successful than any of the previous people, because what the Emperor Alexius had wanted back in 1095 were an emperor or a king, some of the outstanding, powerful figures in the West, certainly not peasants. Okay, nobles were not bad. After all, they did establish the Kingdom of Jerusalem after their conquest of Jerusalem. But I wanted a king and an emperor. And so this time, St. Bernard recruited a king and an emperor. He got King Louis of France, and he got Conrad III, Holy Roman Emperor. So an emperor and a king to go on this crusade. And I haven't mentioned women much in this, but on the first crusade, the peasants, they weren't just men, but they took their whole families right on the crusade. I mean, so you can imagine the kind of complications and with the women and the children along, but that's what the peasants, they took their families along with them, and also the nobles. The nobles took women along. In fact, in this crusade, what's called the Second Crusade now, in 1144, preached by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, the French king will take his wife along with him. Anybody know who the wife of the French king was in 1144? One of the most famous women. Eleanor of Aquitaine, very good. I don't know who said it, but anyway, that's the answer. Eleanor of Aquitaine was the wife of King Louis, and Eleanor on that, well, I'll get back to that in just a second. Bernard of Clairvaux, it was said of Bernard of Clairvaux that mothers or wives hid their husbands and mothers hid their sons when they knew that Bernard of Clairvaux was coming into their area and recruiting people, men for a crusade, because his voice was irresistible. His plea was just undeniable, and that fathers and sons gathered very quickly, packed up, and left town, and were to head out to St. Bernard for the crusade. But on that crusade, it was a complete failure. They never got past Asia Minor. They didn't get into the Holy Land. And but what happened is Eleanor of Aquitaine flirted with one of Louis's generals. And Louis became very excited about that and divorced her, and she came back home and married Henry II of England, and so that Henry and Eleanor of Aquitaine, two of the great figures of the 12th century Renaissance. Well, anyway, that was the Second Crusade. A complete failure, despite the fact that it was preached by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, despite the fact that an emperor and a king led it, but it collapsed completely. The Third Crusade will come at the end of the 12th century. The third Crusade is sometimes called the King's Crusade, because it was the ideal crusade. I mean, you had an emperor and two kings who will go. And the reason for it is because one of the greatest generals among the Arabs and the Turks was an Egyptian by the name of Saladin, Saladin. Saladin. And Saladin was intellectual, well-read, a man of tolerance, a man of compromise, a man of understanding, outstanding man on the other side, a great and absolutely unique military leader, and was able to conquer, overrun the whole kingdom of Jerusalem. The kingdom of Jerusalem is gone by 1188, and so that in 1188. In just a few years, 1188, the crusade was called, and you had Frederick I, the Holy Roman Emperor, who had a gentleman with a red beard, and he had already spent time trying to defeat the Lombard towns in northern Italy and make them a part of the Holy Roman Empire. And the people in northern Italy, their word for his red beard was, what was it? Anybody remember? Barbarossa. They called him Frederick Barbarossa. Barbarossa means red-bearded. Frederick Barbarossa. Frederick I, Barbarossa. All right, so Holy Roman Emperor to lead this crusade. King Francis, Philip II of France. Philip II of France. His nickname was Augustus. So Philip Augustus. Now, whether he applied that name to himself or whether the people referred to him as, because certainly a whole lot better than the names of some of those French kings that I told you about earlier. I mean, some of the French kings had names like Charles the Bald, Charles the Simple. I would find it a lot easier addressing directly Frederick the First as Barbarossa than to call King Charles the Bald or Harry the Simple or something like that. Well, anyway, so you got Holy Roman Emperor, you got the Augustus King of France, and in England you've got Richard the First, who is a Norman, and what did he call himself in French? He called himself Coeur de Lion, right? I get that right? Who's the French teachers here? Coeur de Lion, or the Lion-Hearted, or Richard the Lion-Hearted. And so these are the leaders of the King's Crusade. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I, Barbarossa, Philip II Augustus of France, and Richard I, the Lion-Hearted of England. Okay, all right. So all set now for the third crusade, the King's Crusade. We're going to have great success? Okay, all right. Frederick I, Barbarossa goes overland, and he's crossing territory. He's passed through Constantinople. He's crossing territory in Asia Minor, a small stream. Some say a river, but others say a small stream. He's loaded down with his chain armor and his weapons and everything. His horse stumbles as it goes across the stream, and Frederick is thrown off his horse and lands in 2 feet of water. But before anybody can get there to help him, he's drowned. And so Frederick I, Barbarossa, dies in this accident when his horse stumbles and he drowns in Asia Minor. Okay, strike the emperor on the crusade. Okay, so we pick up the King of France, Philip II. Well, Philip II and Richard I had been at war with each other for decades, not decades, but for several years, and both of them, Philip II was trying to get all of the Norman English out of northern France, and so Philip arrives at Acre, but he decides that he's got a stomach ailment, and he gets back on board his ship and heads back to France and conquers all of English territory on French land except Calais. And that's not a nice way to treat your buddy who's gone with you on a crusade, Richard the Lion-Hearted. So Richard's the only one now headed for Jerusalem. He plods on, he engages in battle, but he Saladin's too much for him. And so he finally gives up, and in fact he's captured. And well, he's not captured there, he captured all the way back. But he and Saladin sit down, and Saladin says, okay, I'll tell you what, we won't fight anymore, but we will allow your Western pilgrims to come to the holy sites, and we'll not molest them, we'll not bother them. And so all Richard has got is the right for Western pilgrims to come to the Holy Land unmolested. And he turns around, heads home. He's captured in Western Europe and held for ransom. And why the English paid the ransom to get him back, I'll never know. Any good for the English. Well, that was the King's Crusade, the one that the righteous really hoped for. And before we go, I will go ahead to 2012 and tell you about one more crusade. Oh, gee, I forgot. I forgot the big one. Oh, man, the Fourth Crusade. Absolutely. I just very quickly I'll say about the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade, by the 1190s, particularly after the failure of the King's Crusade in 1192, that's all over, Richard's gone by that time. After that failure, every pope now is going to have a crusade. You can't be pope any longer without calling for a crusade. And the new pope in 1190, he's not pope until 1198. And he's never pope from 1198 to 1216. And his name is, you watch out now because a pope with a name like this can sneak up on you. His name is Innocent. His name is Pope Innocent, and he's the third pope to wear that papal name, Innocent III. And so Pope Innocent III decides that he's going to call a crusade, and this is going to be a successful one. Now, I might tell you ahead of time that Pope Innocent III is the most powerful pope in the whole history of the papacy. I mean, before since, there's never been a pope that exerts the kind of power and authority that this pope does. You say, oh Lord, you mean all he's got a little handful of Swiss guards? How can a pope exert that kind of power in Western Europe? Because he's a smart pope, and by the time he has become pope, the various means by which the church can exercise its power in the world are almost infinite, both spiritual and material. Besides, this pope is smart as a whip, and he knows exactly what he's doing. He looks around and he sees what move to make, and there's no question that he is really a smart man. And so this is Pope Innocent III, and Innocent III calls it. He can't get an emperor because the Holy Roman Emperor, who was Henry VI, has just died, and he has left a 3-year-old son, and that's too early for the Pope to negotiate a crusade. So there's no emperor that can go on this crusade, and really there are no nobles. He just turns to the French. The Franks were the ones who started all this. We can count on the Franks. They're the people of God. They are the people who in 732 had saved Western Europe from destruction by the Arabs with their new religion of Islam in 732 in the Battle of Tours. The Franks, they're the ones who turned. So he turned to the Franks and said to them, said his legates, will you undertake the cross to the Holy Land? And Frank said, yeah, but we don't have any money. And he said, well, we'll see if we can work something out. They said, well, we don't have boats. How are we going to get there? And the Pope said, okay, let me do some negotiating with the Venetians. Well, the Venetians had money, and the Venetians had boats. And they said, well, we'll take them, but then we expect to be paid now. How are we going to get our money? We're taking these people to the Holy Land. And the Pope says, well, let's let the Venetians and the French work that out. And the Venetians and the French got together, and the Venetians said, I'll tell you what, there's this little place on the Asiatic coast, on the coast of Hungary, the seaport there, that we'd like to have that. And we know that Hungary is one of the great allies of the papacy, and there are good relations between them, but he won't mind if we take Hungary. So if you French Crusaders, you Franks will help me, help the French take Zara from the king of Hungary, we'll take you on to the Holy Land. They said, okay, we'll do that. And so they did, in short order. They took Zara, they came to a Venetian seaport, and the Franks said to the Venetians, okay, on to the Holy Land. The Venetians said, well, you don't think that that's enough payment for taking you all the way to Jerusalem? One more stop. And the Frank said, okay, well, where now? And they said, how about Constantinople? And Frank said, what? Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, never has been overrun in all its history from the early centuries of AD down to the present time. You're asking a handful of Franks and Venetians take the city of Constantinople? You're crazy. Venetian said, hold on. We know some people in Constantinople who are not all that pleased with the ruling authority, and they're going to give us some help. Come on, guys, come on. We want to get Jerusalem. Oh, to Jerusalem. Come on, let's go. And so, okay. And do you know that between 1201 and 1204, the Franks and the Venetians overran Constantinople and set up the Latin kingdom. The Latin kingdom drove the Greeks out and set up the Latin kingdom of Byzantium. Lasted 60 years, the Latin kingdom of Byzantium, and it was the Venetians and the Franks made enormous wealth from that 60-year occupation. Constantinople. Finally, the Greeks had moved over into Asia Minor and set up some small kingdoms, made a counterattack in 1260 and retook Constantinople, but the Byzantine Empire was never the same after that. Well, what did the Pope think of all of this? Well, he excommunicated the crusade when they took Zara, and he double excommunicated them when they took Constantinople. But then, to tell you how shrewd Innocent III was, he said, well, on second thought, you know, really what you've done, you know, he said, God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders do. Who would ever have thought that a handful of Franks and Venetians overrunning Constantinople and defeating the wrong-headed Greek Orthodox Church gave me the opportunity to declare that the churches are one and I am the head of both the Eastern and the Western Church. Thank you, God. And he did a Te Deum in St. Peter's Church, offering prayer and thanksgiving to God for what he had brought about in the Fourth Crusade. Woo! I'm done. Anyway, all right. That's it for the Crusades. And next week we're going to do architecture. We're going to look at Romanesque and Gothic architecture, and I hope to have some pictures, that is, some slides of some of the cathedrals, particularly English cathedrals. And I'll tell you how some of this all came about a little later on. Well, I'm glad to see you. I like it when you sing and do crazy stuff in history class. It adds rules. Remember, I think I've quoted him before, but Erasmus said, a little humbug is the lubricant of life.